A Suggestive Inquiry into the Hermetic Mystery, by Mary and Atwood. Part 1. An Exoteric View of the Progress and Theory of Alchemy. Chapter 1. A preliminary account of the Hermetic philosophy with the more salient points of its public history. The Hermetic tradition commences early, concurrent with the dawn of civilization in the Eastern world. All aspects pertaining thereto are inherently romantic and mystical. Its monuments, emblems, and numerous written records, alike obscure and enigmatic, constitute one of the most remarkable chapters in the history of the human mind. Indeed, it would prove an arduous and well-nigh infinite task to discuss every particular advanced by various individuals concerning the art of alchemy, and equally difficult to establish with certainty the origin of a science which has been successively attributed to Adam, Noah and his son Cham, to Solomon, Zoroaster, and the Egyptian Hermes. Fortunately, this obscurity is of little consequence to an inquiry concerned far more with the principles and operations of the occult science than with the epoch and geographical locus of their reputed discovery. Perhaps nothing is less profitable or more calculated to divert the intellect from matters of genuine import than this very question of historical origin, which, even when we have exerted every effort to resolve and retain it, leaves us in truth no wiser than we were previously. Of what significance is it, for instance, that we attribute letters to Cadmus, trace oracles to Zoroaster, the Kabbalah to Moses, the Eleusinian mysteries to Orpheus, or Freemasonry to Noah, whilst we remain profoundly ignorant of the essence and genuine source of any of these phenomena, failing to perceive that truth, being universally eternal, does not always originate in the place where it is first comprehended. We shall not tarry, therefore, to ascertain, even were it feasible, whether the Hermetic science was indeed preserved to humanity upon the Syriatic pillars after the deluge, whether Egypt or Palestine may assert equal claims to its custody, or whether, in truth, that Smaragdin table, whose singular inscription has been preserved to this day, is attributable to Hermes or to any other name. It may suffice for our present purpose to accept the general assertion of its proponents, and to regard alchemy as an ancient art coeval, for aught we know to the contrary, with the universe itself. For although attempts have been made, as by Hermann Conring, to dismiss it as a recent invention, and though it is also true that through a singularly envious fate nearly all Egyptian records of the art have perished, we nevertheless find the primary evidence preserved in the works of Athanasius Kircher, the learned Dane Olaus Baricius, and Robertus Valensis in the first volume of the Chemical Theatre, more than sufficient to refute every objection of this kind, in addition to the ample collateral probability bequeathed to us by the preeminent Greek authors, historical and philosophical. In order to demonstrate that the propositions we may subsequently have occasion to advance are not unwarranted, as well as to introduce more effectively a highly unconventional subject, it will be necessary to outline a brief account of the alchemical philosophers, alongside the literature and public testimonies of their science. This is all the more requisite since none of the numerous histories of philosophy compiled in or translated into our language address the subject in a manner commensurate with the profound and pervasive influence this discipline once exerted upon the human mind, which it certainly appears to deserve. This once celebrated art, then, has been depicted both as conferring a name upon, and receiving one from its motherland, Cham, for by this name, according to Plutarch, Egypt was for a long period designated, or Chamia, by reason of the extreme blackness of her soil, or, as others contend, because the art of Vulcan was first practiced there by Cham, one of the sons of the patriarch, from whom they thus derive both the appellation and the art itself. Yet, By the word chamia, Plutarch observes, the seeing pupil of the human eye was also designated, alongside other dark substances, whence perhaps alchemy, so obscure in its lineage, has likewise been stigmatized as a black art. While etymological research has undoubtedly proved useful in advancing and corroborating hypotheses once suggested, it does not constitute a method of primary discovery. Derivations may be too easily accommodated to any preconception, and words cannot convey true concepts unless their underlying principle is already understood. Being unable at present, therefore, to determine whether the art bestowed an appellation upon, or received one from Cham, the Persian prince Alcuin, as others have contended, or that dark Egyptian soil, we may, for the purpose of establishing a historical point of departure, commence the Hermetic narrative with Hermes, styled by the Greeks Trismegistus, the illustrious and widely renowned sovereign and adept of Egypt, who, according to Suedas, flourished prior to the era of the pharaohs, approximately 4 centuries before Moses, or, by other computations, some 1900 years before the Christian era. This monarch, much like Solomon, is highly celebrated by antiquity for his wisdom and proficiency in the occult operations of nature, as well as for his reputed discovery of the quintessential perfectibility of the 3 kingdoms within their homogeneous unity. Hence he is styled the thrice great Hermes, possessing as he did the spiritual comprehension of all things in their universal law. It is deeply to be lamented that not one of the numerous treatises attributed to him, which are catalogued in detail by Clemens Alexandrinus, escaped the destructive hand of Diocletian, especially if we evaluate them, as Iamblichus assures us we may, by those Asclepian dialogues and the divine Poimander, which still circulate under the name of Hermes. Both are preserved in the Latin translation of Ficinus, and have been capably rendered into our language by doubter Everard. The latter, though a brief work, surpasses the majority of extant treatises in the sublimity of its doctrine and expression. Its passages flow eloquently, as if directly from the fountain of nature, imbued with an intelligence far more efficacious in dislodging the rational skeptic from his negative stance and guiding him into the more luminous realms of intelligible reality than many theological discourses which, operating on a lower plane of comprehension, are incapable of maintaining so elevated and intellectual a position. Yet the subjects treated in the books of the Poimander and Asclepius are theosophical and metaphysical, denoting our divine potential and the promise of regeneration rather than the physical foundation of either. This latter aspect, together with the practical methodology of alchemy, is expounded in the Tractatus Aureus or Golden Treatise, an admirable relic comprising 7 chapters and attributed to the same author. The Smaragdin Table, which in its few enigmatic yet remarkable lines is said to comprehend the operative principle and entire subject of the art, we here subjoin. From the original Arabic and Greek copies, it has been rendered into Latin by Kircher as follows. The Smaragdin Table of Hermes. True, without falsehood, certain and most true, that which is above is even as that which is below, and that which is below is even as that which is above, for the accomplishment of the miracles of the one thing. And as all things have arisen from one by the mediation of one, so all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation. The father of it is the sun, the mother of it is the moon, the wind carries it in its womb, the nurse thereof is the earth. This is the father of all perfection, or consummation of the entire world. The power thereof is integral if it be converted into earth. Thou shalt separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great sagacity. It ascends from earth to heaven, and again descends to earth, and receives the strength of the superiors and of the inferiors. So thou shalt possess the glory of the whole world. Therefore let all obscurity flee before thee. This is the strong fortitude of all fortitudes, overcoming every subtle thing and penetrating every solid thing. So the world was created. Hence arose all wonderful adaptations, of which this is the manner. Therefore am I called thrice great Hermes, possessing the three parts of the philosophy of the whole world. That which I have recorded concerning the operation of the sun is now consummated. This emerald tablet, unique and authentic though it may be deemed, is all that remains to us of the sacred art of Egypt. A sparse collection of riddles and fables, all more or less imperfect, preserved by the Greeks, alongside certain inscrutable hieroglyphics, are still to be found cited in various alchemical records. But the original testaments have been entirely swept away. Indeed, when we duly contemplate all that is recounted by the chroniclers of that ancient dynasty, her extraordinary renown for power, affluence, wisdom, and magical proficiency, and reflect that even when these glories had waned, when Herodotus visited the metropolis after the sacerdotal governance of the pharaohs had been subverted by Cambyses, who, as a ruthless conqueror, incinerated the temples and nearly eradicated the priesthood, and after the infiltration of foreigners had been allowed, and civil strife had raged almost to the realization of the Asclepian prophecy. Even then, considering the marvels recorded by that historian of her lingering splendor and magnificence, what must we now conclude, when, after the passage of so many more destructive epochs, we survey the still mightily surviving witnesses of such immense glory, monumental and imposing even in the final stages of their decay? Are we to deem the ancient chronicles fallacious merely because they depict marvels beyond ready comprehension? Or do we not possess, visible before our very eyes, the manifest evidence of a forgotten science and the vestiges of an intellect superior to our own? For what purpose did the nations of the world hasten to Memphis? To what end did Pythagoras, Thales, Democritus, and Plato confine themselves there in solitude for several years, if not to be initiated into the profound wisdom and learning of the Egyptians? For what other purpose than to acquire the knowledge of that mighty art by which Egypt arose, governed, and dazzled the entire contemporary world, keeping the ignorant, profane, and vulgar in awe until the dark day of desolation arrived through self-degradation, when, by neglecting to obey the law by which she ruled, all collapsed as had been foretold, and sinking progressively deeper into crime and presumption, she was ultimately annihilated, and her every sacred institution violated and despoiled by barbarians? O Egypt! Egypt! Naught but fables of thy religion shall endure, and even these will appear incredible to posterity. Only words engraved upon stone shall remain to narrate thy pious deeds. The Scythian, the Indian, or some other foreign nation of like character, shall inhabit thy land. For the gods shall return to heaven, and all the inhabitants of this land shall perish. Thus Egypt, bereft of both divine and human presence, shall be left desolate. Wherefore do you weep, O Asclepius? Egypt shall endure even more grievous calamities. She who was once holy, and, by virtue of her devotion, the greatest lover of the gods on earth, shall be forsaken. And she, who was the sole exemplar of sanctity and the mistress of piety, shall become a monument of the utmost cruelty. And darkness shall be preferred to light, and death shall be deemed more profitable than life. None shall cast their eyes upward to heaven. The devout man shall be deemed insane, the impious thought wise, the ferocious brave, and the most wicked of men shall be esteemed good. For the soul and all matters pertaining to it, whereby it is either naturally immortal or conceives that it shall attain immortality, in accordance with what I have explained to you, shall not only become objects of derision, but shall be dismissed as mere vanity. Believe me, also, that capital punishment shall be decreed for any who devote themselves to the religion of intellect. New statutes and novel laws shall be instituted, and nothing sacred, nor anything worthy of heaven or celestial concerns, shall be entertained or believed in the human mind. Every divine voice shall, through an enforced silence, be struck dumb. The fruits of the earth shall be corrupted, and the very air shall languish in a mournful stupor. Such events, and so dismal a senility of the world, shall come to pass, marked by such impiety, disorder, and the untimely absence of all that is good. Such is the substance of a prophecy which, because it was assumed to refer to the Christian era, has been disparaged and deemed a forgery by the skeptical scholars of modern times. It is, however, difficult to comprehend why it should have been regarded as so offensive. For the early history of Christianity assuredly does not fulfill its terms. It was a departure from divinity that was foretold, and not such a spiritual revival as occurred through the teachings of Jesus Christ and his apostles. During that epoch, philosophy also flourished, and the spirit of the word possessed potent efficacy in faith to heal and to redeem. Had the prophecy been a forgery by Apuleius, or another contemporary adversary of Christianity, the early church fathers must have been aware of the deception. Yet they clearly were not, as is evident from the fact that both Lactantius and St. Augustine mention it without casting doubt upon its authenticity. Furthermore, although the latter esteemed it to be instinctive fallacis spiritus, he might perhaps have thought otherwise had his life been further prolonged. In his day, Christianity was still radiant, pure, and efficacious, flowing directly from the divine fountain. Faith was then grounded in reality and vital operation, and the mystery of human regeneration, so zealously proclaimed, was also rationally comprehended. The fulfillment of this prophecy with respect to Egypt appears to have occurred in part long beforehand, and in part to have been deferred to later epochs, when the sacred mysteries, being too openly exposed to the multitude, were perverted and desecrated through their abuse. Yet, this prophecy transports us far beyond the proper chronological order. It will be necessary, in tracing the progress of our science, to return once more to Egypt. The epoch of her true grandeur is, as is well known, shrouded in oblivion. Yet, during the protracted succession of the Ptolemies, the influx of foreigners, which had for so long been successfully prohibited, became excessive. Her internal peace was shattered, yet her art and wisdom diffused abroad alongside her renown. Foreigners obtained initiation into the mysteries of Isis, and India, Arabia, China, and Persia vied with Egypt and with one another in Magian skill and prowess. Pliny informs us that it was Ostanes, the Persian sage accompanying the army of Xerxes, who first imbued Greece with the formidable and portentous spirit of his nation. Subsequently, the Greek philosophers, both young and old, conceiving a disdain for the lesser religion of their own land, grew eager to visit the Eastern temples, and that of Memphis above all, in order to verify those hopes to which a prior spirit of inquiry and this novel excitement had so abundantly given rise. Among the earliest recorded of these, after Thales, Pythagoras, and a few others whose writings have perished, is Democritus of Abdera, who has frequently been styled the father of experimental philosophy, and who, in his treatise on sacred physics, deals specifically with the Hermetic art and that occult discovery upon which the systems of ancient philosophy appear to have been consistently established. Of this invaluable work, Several editions are said to remain extant, and Synesius has further illuminated it with a commentary. Nicholas Flamel, likewise, of more recent celebrity, has appended extracts from this same treatise at the conclusion of a highly instructive work. That its authenticity should be disputed by the unlearned is scarcely surprising, yet among the ancients no doubt regarding it is anywhere to be found. Pliny bears witness to the experimental renown of Democritus, as well as his proficiency in and practice of the occult sciences, both in his native city of Abdera and subsequently at Athens, during the period when Socrates was teaching there. It is indeed extraordinary that both arts, namely medicine and magic, flourished equally in the same age, the former being illuminated by Hippocrates, and the latter by Democritus, among others. Seneca also mentions his artificial fabrication of precious stones, and it is recorded that, upon his return home, he devoted his entire leisure to these and similar hyperphysical investigations. During the sojourn of Democritus in Memphis, he is reputed to have allied himself in his studies with a Hebrew woman named Maria, who was highly distinguished in that era for her profound advancements in philosophy, most notably within the domain of the Hermetic art. An extant treatise, entitled The Most Wise Mary on the Prescriptions of the Philosophical Stone, survives to this day, as does the Practical Mary, a singularly excellent and highly esteemed fragment preserved within alchemical collections. Among the Greeks, however, next to Democritus, it is Anaxagoras who is celebrated as an adept of the alchemical art. The remnants of his writings are lamentably sparse, preserved almost exclusively in manuscript form, save for a few fragments that have been adventitiously translated. From these surviving passages, however, we are led to infer favorably regarding the general character of his expositions, writings which our compatriot Thomas Norton, in the Prome to his quaint Ordinal of Alchemy, highly extols, thereby contrasting him favorably with the envious authors of his generation. All masters who write of this solemn work have rendered their volumes obscure and dark, in verses, in parables, and metaphors deep, which cause the poor scholar to labor and weep. For when in their practice they seek to essay, they squander their substance and wander astray. Hermes, Rhasis, Geber, and Avicenna of old, Merlin, Hortolin, Democritus, as we are told, with Bacon and Raymond, and Aristotle beside, did under dark covers their mysteries hide. For though they wrote clearly in much of their pen, their clauses, enveloped in cloud, baffled men. From laymen and scholars and all of mankind, they cloaked this great art, that none might it find. By their books they present such a rational grace, as leads many souls to despair in the chase. Yet Anaxagoras wrote plainest of all, in his book of natural conversions we call, of all the old fathers whom ever I found, he most did disclose of this science the ground, whereat Aristotle, with envy possessed, rebuked him unjustly, as must be confessed, in numerous places, as I can relate, lest men to his wisdom should open the gate. For he was most bounteous in knowledge and love, may God grant his soul everlasting above. And those who sowed seeds of malevolent spite, may God in his mercy forgive in his sight. Adepts generally cast severe censure upon Aristotle, not merely for having shrouded the knowledge he clandestinely possessed, but also for having deliberately, as they bitterly complain, diverted humanity from the path of genuine experimentation. We hesitate to pronounce judgment upon this matter, for, however much the sterility of his philosophy may be deplored, it appears highly improbable that any philosopher, let alone one who labored with such meticulous diligence as Aristotle, should designedly strive to deceive mankind. His perspective was peculiar, and indeed appears inherently inequitable. He reproaches his predecessors for the diverse and seemingly contradictory propositions they advanced in philosophizing contradictory, that is, when their language is interpreted in a literal sense. For he never disputes their underlying meaning and scrupulously avoids challenging their fundamental principles. Indeed, his metaphysics, which serve as the natural touchstone of his entire system, diverge in no essential aspect or fundamental particular from those of Anaxagoras, Plato, and Heraclitus. Certain epistles addressed to Alexander the Great regarding the philosopher's stone, attributed to Aristotle, are preserved in the 5th volume of the Theatrum Chemicum, and the Secreta Secretorum is widely acknowledged to be authentic. Furthermore, in his treatise on meteors, a more lucid comprehension of intrinsic causes is evinced than might be apparent to the superficial observer. Conversely, the entire philosophy of Plato is hyperphysical. The Phaedrus, the Philebus, the 7th book of the Laws, the sublime and beautiful Parmenides, the Phaedo, the Banquet, and the Timaeus have long been admired by scholars without being fully comprehended. A mystical veil pervades the whole, and recondite illusions baffle the efforts of ordinary reason and imagination. Yet the philosopher adopts a more familiar tone in his epistles, and if his correspondence with Dionysius of Syracuse had concerned only moral philosophy and the abstract relations of the intellect, whence arose that profound apprehension, therein expressed, regarding the committing of truth to manuscript, in all probability, the science that attracted the tyrant to the philosopher was of a more practical and lucratively compelling nature than abstract speculations would appear to a mind of that temperament. Indeed, O son of Dionysius and Doris, this inquiry of yours concerning the primary cause of all beautiful things is endowed with a peculiar quality, or rather, it represents a labor of the soul concerning these matters, from which he who is not delivered will never truly attain unto the truth. Wisdom must be pursued for her own sake, and not for the sake of gold, silver, or any intermediary benefit, lest all these rewards be withheld concurrently, while the source thereof remains undiscovered. A treatise on the philosopher's stone, attributed to Plato, is indeed contained within the 5th volume of the Theatrum Chemicum, but its authenticity remains highly dubious. Furthermore, since the principal Greek records of this art were subsequently destroyed along with the remnants of Egyptian literature at Alexandria, we are disinclined to enroll either of these illustrious names without more substantial, extant evidence to substantiate their claim to the title of Hermetic philosophers. They are introduced here in their historical sequence because we hope to demonstrate, as the nature of this subject is progressively unfolded, that the most renowned schools of theosophy have in all ages been founded upon a uniform experimental basis, guided by a profound science of truth possessed by their leaders. It was approximately in the year 284 of the Christian era when, as Suedas relates, the facility with which the Egyptians were able to produce gold and silver, and consequently to enlist armies against Rome, aroused the envy and indignation of the emperor to such a degree that he promulgated an edict commanding that every chemical text be confiscated and burned collectively in the public marketplace. By this ignominious act, the emperor vainly hoped, as the historian observes, to deprive them of the means of further harassing his empire. Thus does Suedas also endeavor to account for the silence of antiquity regarding the Egyptian art. Yet, notwithstanding this extensive sacrilege, the art appears to have been continuously revived in Egypt throughout the entire epoch of her decline. And, although the historical records are sparse, we possess the memorable account of Cleopatra, the last sovereign, dissolving her earring in a vinegar of such extraordinary acidity as is known only to philosophers who operate upon the true foundation of nature. Mystical legends are likewise recounted concerning her pursuits with Mark Antony, and certain chemical treatises attributed to this princess remain extant to this day. It is unnecessary to linger long over our inquiries regarding Rome. A metropolis so preeminently celebrated for luxury and martial prowess was scarcely disposed to achieve high proficiency in the subtler sciences of nature. Certain abortive attempts by Caligula are recounted by Pliny, while Virgil, Ovid, Horace, Vitruvius, and other illustrious figures of the Augustan age have been gravely accused of sorcery and of dabbling in the occult arts. Yet the perpetual lamps afford the most convincing evidence, and that without controversy, that the Romans possessed some understanding of chemistry and the occult laws of light. Several of these vessels are described by Panceralis, and St. Augustine mentions one consecrated to Venus in his own day which was entirely inextinguishable. The most remarkable among them, however, were those discovered in the tomb of Tullia, and another found near Alestes in the year 1500 by a rustic who, digging deeper than was his custom, unearthed an earthen vessel or urn containing a second urn within. Within this innermost vessel lay a lamp placed between two cylindrical receptacles, the one of gold and the other of silver, each filled with an exceedingly pure liquid, by the virtue of which it is probable these lamps had continued to burn for upwards of 1500 years. Indeed, but for the reckless intrusion of barbarian curiosity, they might have maintained their miraculous illumination even unto the present day. By the inscription discovered upon these vessels, it appears they were the workmanship of one Maximus Olybius, who thereby demonstrated a mastery in the adjustment of gaseous elements or other ethereal adaptations far superior to any knowledge possessed at the present day. The verses engraved upon the urn are as follows. Sacred gift to Plato, touch it not, ye thieves. That which lies concealed within this urn remains unknown to you. For the elements, disposed with arduous labor, the great Olybius hath enclosed beneath this diminutive vessel. May a bounteous guardian attend it with the abundance of the horn, lest the value of so precious a liquid perish. These lines have been translated thus. Plunderers, forbear this gift to touch. 'Tis awful Pluto's own. A secret rare the world conceals, to such as you unknown. Olybius, in this slender vase, the elements hath chained, digested with laborious art, from secret science gained. With guardian care, two copious urns the costly juice confine, lest through the ruins of decay, the lamp should cease to shine. Upon the lesser urn were inscribed these words. Hence, ye most villainous thieves, what seek ye with your searching glances? Hence with your Mercury, adorned with his winged cap and bearing the caduceus. Maximus freely offers this gift as a sacred dedication to great Pluto. Plunderers with prying eyes, away! What mean ye by this curious stay? Hence with your cunning patron god, with bonnet winged and magic rod, sacred alone to Pluto's name, this mighty art of endless fame. Hermolaus Barbarus, in his corollary to Dioscorus, or some other treatise wherein he discourses upon the element of water in general, alludes to a particular species distinct from all other waters or liquors, observing, there is a celestial, or rather a divine water of the chemists, with which both Democritus and Trismegistus were acquainted, designating it as divine water, Scythian latex, and the like, which is a spirit of the nature of the ether and the quintessence of things, from which potable gold and the philosopher's stone derive their origin. The ancient author of the Apocalypse of the Secret Spirit of Nature is likewise cited by Heinrich Kunrath concerning this water, and he devoutly asserts that the ether within this preterperfect aqueous body will burn perpetually, without diminution or consumption of itself, provided only that the external air be excluded. Furthermore, in addition to those instances recorded by Panseralis, there exist modern accounts of lamps discovered burning within the tombs and ancient caverns of Greece and Germany. Yet the Benonian enigma, celebrated for ages and remaining unresolved, ought not to be omitted here, inasmuch as this relic has perplexed numerous erudite antiquarians, while the adepts claim that it refers exclusively to the occult material of their art. Ilia Lilia Crispis, neither man nor woman nor androgyne, neither maiden nor youth nor aged woman, neither chaste nor harlot nor modest, but all of these, snatched away neither by hunger, nor by sword, nor by poison, but by all, resting neither in heaven, nor earth, nor water, but lying everywhere. Lucius Agatho Priscus, neither husband, nor lover, nor kinsman, neither mourning, nor rejoicing, nor weeping erected this monument, which is neither mound, nor pyramid, nor tomb, but all of these. He knows, yet knows not, for whom he hath erected it. This is assuredly a tomb. A corpse it doth not contain, yet the corpse itself is also the tomb. The following admirable translations appeared among certain original contributions in an early issue of a literary periodical several years since. Ilia Lilia Crispis, nor male, nor female, nor hermaphrodite, nor virgin, woman, young or old, nor chaste, nor harlot, modest height, but all of them, as you are told. Not slain by poison, famine, sword. Yet each did claim its share. Not in heaven, earth, or waters broad it lies, but everywhere. Lucius Agatho Priscus. No husband, lover, kinsman, friend, rejoicing, sorrowing at life's end, knows or knows not. For whom is placed this, what? This pyramid so raised and graced, this grave, this sepulchre? 'Tis neither, but 'tis all and each together. Without a body, I aver, this is in truth a sepulchre, but notwithstanding, I proclaim both corpse and sepulchre the same. All these contradictory assertions are reputed by the alchemists to relate to the properties of their universal subject, as we shall hereafter endeavor to elucidate. Michael Meyer hath detailed this entire illusion in his Symbola, and Nicholas Barnard, in the Chemical Theatre, hath provided a commentary upon the same. But to proceed, transferring our attention from Rome to Alexandria, we discover numerous Christian Platonists and theologians studying and discussing the occult art within their writings. Saint John the Apostle and Evangelist is cited as having practiced this art for the benefit of the poor, not only in healing the sick, but also in confecting gold, silver, and precious stones for their relief. Saint Victor relates the particulars of these transactions in a commentary, and the Greek Catholics were accustomed to intone the following verses in a hymn appointed for the Mass on the feast of Saint John. When he had solidified the fragmented gems, he distributed them, thus restored, among the poor. He possesses an inexhaustible treasure, who fashioned gold from twigs and precious stones from common pebbles. Directing our attention to the general testimony of the Fathers, we observe that the early Catholic Church did not neglect to avail herself of those powers which sanctity of life and a well-founded faith had secured for her. Nor is there any doubt that the Apostles, when they instituted and bequeathed certain ordinances and elementary types, such as water, oil, salt, and light, intended to signify real and notable spiritual efficacies. Yet our reformers, misinterpreting these rites as mere superstitions, and because they had ceased to convey their original significance, cast them entirely aside, retaining, in truth, little more of the mystery of regeneration than a traditional belief. The Romanists, on the other hand, being equally oblivious, demonstrated only the depths to which human credulity and ignorance may descend. By attributing inherent holiness to these material signs, divorced from the spirit and the soul reality signified, and by adding, furthermore, numerous follies of their own invention to the original ordinations, they lapsed into a most servile and senseless form of idolatry. And since one of the most prolific sources of dissension within the Christian Church has arisen concerning these very shadows and doctrinal types, it is to be hoped that, should they ever again be generally reintroduced, it will not be upon the basis of ecclesiastical persuasion or mere written authority, which, however eminent and well supported, has never yet proved sufficient to establish unanimity, but rather from a genuine understanding and cooperation with that primordial virtue, apart from which they merely simulate an efficacy and yield unwholesome fruit. There is a singular narrative concerning an early Christian mission to China, recounted by Thomas Vaughan in his Adamic Magic, illustrating how the faith was originally established there and elsewhere through its manifest efficacy and the power of its works in healing and purifying the lives of men. But we find ourselves at Alexandria, during that grand revival which occurred and persisted there for several centuries subsequent to the Christian era, where Plotinus, Philo-Judaeus, Proclus, Porphyry, Iamblichus, Julian, and Apuleius each claimed a genuine knowledge of the theurgic art and of experimental physics upon Hermetic foundations. We shall have frequent occasion to cite their testimony hereafter. Moreover, Heliodorus, Olympiodorus, Synesius, Athenagoras, Zosimus, and Archelaus have each left extant treatises concerning the philosopher's stone. The admirable Hypatia must also be mentioned among these figures, so renowned for her intellectual accomplishments and her tragic end. It was from this lady that Synesius acquired the occult truths of that philosophy to which he thereafter devoted his intellect, and which he never abandoned, pursuing it with even greater zeal when, upon his conversion to Christianity, he became a bishop of the Alexandrian Church. He was circumspect, however, to shield the mysteries of his religion from vulgar profanation, and declined to expound the philosophy of Plato in public, he and his brethren having bound themselves by a solemn oath to initiate none save those who had been worthily prepared and duly approved by the entire conclave. Of Synesius, there survives the alchemical commentary on the aforementioned Democritus, alongside an admirable treatise frequently appended to other discourses, such as those of Artephius and the hieroglyphics of Flammel, which has been translated into English together with Basil Valentine's Chariot of Antimony and the valuable expositions of the adept Kercringius. Heliodorus was an intimate companion and fellow adept of Synesius. In addition to the writings previously cited, the mystical romance of Theogenes and Chariclia was attributed to him as a transgression. Rather than abjure his authorship as demanded, he abdicated his bishopric of Tricca in Thessaly, choosing instead to prosecute his studies in penury and seclusion. Zosimus, an Egyptian by birth, was renowned as a consummate practitioner of the art. The name of Athenagoras is well established in ecclesiastical history. His treatise, which has been translated into French under the title of Perfect Love, demonstrates that he was practically conversant with the very art he so elegantly allegorizes. The capture of Alexandria by the Arabs in the year 640 dispersed the select remnant of intellectual genius still centered within its gates. Not long thereafter, the Caliph Omar, inflamed by Islamic zeal, condemned its magnificent and incomparable library to feed the furnaces of the public baths of the city, a task it is reputed to have sustained for a melancholy period of 6 months. A period of unrestrained religious fanaticism ensued, wherein Christians and Muslims contended for temporal hegemony. In this era, one may discern a manifestation resembling the fulfillment of the Asclepian prophecy. Yet the prevailing corruption was far more widespread than had been foretold. Religion had universally drifted from its vital foundation. Tradition and secular delirium had supplanted intellectual enthusiasm, and fatuous dreams were exalted as oracles in lieu of divine inspiration. The priesthood, bearing the chief culpability, having abandoned the dictates of conscience, endeavored nonetheless to wield the scepter of magical authority. Chaos and licentiousness ensued, which, through gradual toleration, flourished and ultimately predominated in the most egregious forms imaginable. Imperious necessity at length dictated the abandonment of the mysteries. Theurgic rites, despoiled of their sanctity, were prescribed, and the penalty of death was decreed against any who dared to cultivate the religion of the intellect. Meanwhile, those few who resisted the tide of ambitious temptation, indignant at this multifaceted folly and perceiving, through their remaining wisdom, that the invasion of evil had not yet run its course, hastened rather than deferred the crisis. By withdrawing themselves and their salvific science into profound obscurity, they abandoned the world to oblivion and the delusions of outer darkness, a state which, save for rare individual exceptions, persists to this day. It is a singular characteristic of the Hermetic science that adherents of every faith, epoch, nation, and vocation have been numbered among its practitioners, and Arabia, notwithstanding her complicity in the grievous sacrilege at Alexandria, has herself engendered many sagacious monarchs and illustrious philosophers. The precise era in which Prince Geber flourished remains unascertained. Yet, inasmuch as his name achieved great renown and is cited by the most ancient authorities, while he himself references no predecessor, he demands, by any measure, our initial consideration. Furthermore, he is widely esteemed by adepts as the preeminent authority, second only to Hermes, among those who have philosophized by means of this art. Of the 500 treatises reputed to have been composed by his hand, a mere 3 survive for posterity: the Investigation of Perfection, the Sum of the Perfect Magistery, and his Testament. The meager estimation in which these works are held by contemporary chemists stands in stark contrast to the sincere reverence and admiration with which they were formerly examined and cited by such eminent adepts as Albertus Magnus, Lully, and many of the most brilliant luminaries of their epoch. When contemplating the 7th century, the alchemist is typically depicted as bending over his crucibles and alembics, striving to bring within his grasp the philosopher's stone, the transmutation of metals, the universal solvent, and the elixir of life. With these pursuits we associate the name of Geber, the earliest authentic author on the subject, from whose idiosyncratic and cryptic style of composition the term gibberish is said to be derived. Yet, notwithstanding these contentions and the voluminous discourses of modern critics, were our contemporary Illuminati possessed of but a fraction of the experiential knowledge of nature they might otherwise acquire, had they but a single ray of that ancient intellect they so readily deride, how vastly different a spectacle would that remote age present to their view. Instead of envisioning avaricious dotards hovering over crucibles and rudimentary alembics in the futile hope of discovering the elixir and the philosopher's stone, they would perceive the true philosophers, illuminated by a kindred light, operating upon their own domain, experimenting indeed, but by what means and upon what substance? Not with our crude elements, our mercuries, sulfurs, and inanimate salts, but within an entirely different realm of nature, employing more mysterious arts and laboratories that differ fundamentally from those of contemporary use. Laboratories of seemingly ordinary appointments, yet by no means inferior, being thoroughly equipped with vessels, fuel, furnaces, and every necessary material, all harmoniously integrated and unified, With consummate skill did the ancient Geber shroud a beautiful discovery, which only his own art can properly unveil. His enigmatic language is not of the mundane, tepid variety common to our time. Rather, taken literally, his recipes exhibit such extreme absurdity as folly would never dare to propose, nor common sense devise. They constitute, in truth, the protective veil of wisdom, designed to shield her universal magistery from an incompetent and visionary world. Yet, though securely sealed, they are calculated to stimulate rational curiosity and offer guidance to those who have already embarked upon the true path, while serving to mislead in practice only the most credulous and incompetent. Those who have truly comprehended Geber, his fellow adepts, unanimously declare that he has spoken the truth, albeit in disguise, with admirable acumen and precision. Let others, therefore, who make no claim to comprehension, and to whom these writings appear as mere unintelligible jargon, take heed, lest they display to posterity both a profound ignorance and a vanity of intellect. Rhazes, another Arabian alchemist, enjoyed an even greater public renown than Geber, owing to the demonstrable exhibitions of his transmuting skill. Excellent excerpts from his treatises, which are reputed to survive principally in manuscript, frequently appear within the works of Roger Bacon. The narrative of Morinus, recounting how, in his youth, he abandoned his family and native city to seek the sage Adfar, a reclusive adept whose reputation had reached him from Alexandria, and how he located him, secured his trust, and ultimately became his devoted disciple, is related by his biographer with great naturalness and charm, as are his subsequent travels following his patron's demise, his relations with King Khalid, and the initiation and eventual conversion of that monarch to Christianity. Yet, the details are recounted at too great a length to admit of extraction here. A highly engaging and esteemed work, purporting to be a dialogue between himself and Khalid, is extant under the name of Morinus, and has been transcribed into numerous compilations. Khalid likewise authored several treatises. His Liber Secretorum, or The Secret of Secrets, as it has been designated, has been translated into English, French, and Latin. Prince Averroes and the renowned Avicenna next command our attention. The latter became known to the world during the interval between the 9th and 10th centuries. His powerful yet ill-directed genius, closely resembling that of Paracelsus, was the source of considerable suffering and personal desolation. Nevertheless, his name was celebrated throughout Asia, and his authority remained preeminent in the medical schools of Europe until well after the Reformation. He is reported to have practiced transmutation, alongside the magical arts in general, to a very considerable degree. Yet his surviving alchemical writings are neither luminous nor abundant, at least among those whose authenticity is well established. Artephius was a Hebrew who, through the efficacy of the elixir, is reported to have lived for a span of 1,000 years. Though opinions may diverge regarding the truth or credibility of this assertion, he himself affirms it, and Paracelsus, Pontanus, and Roger Bacon appear to lend credence to the account, which is preserved in his celebrated treatise on the Philosopher's Stone and reads as follows. I, Artephius, having acquired the entirety of the art from the volumes of the true Hermes, was once, like others, envious. Yet having lived approximately 1,000 years, and having observed during this vast epoch that men have been incapable of perfecting this same magistery due to the obscurity of the philosopher's words, I am moved by compassion and a clear conscience. I have resolved, therefore, in these my final days, to expound the whole matter with sincerity and truth, so that mankind may have nothing further to desire regarding this work. I accept but a single matter, which it is not lawful for me to commit to writing, inasmuch as it can be truly revealed only by God or by a master. Nonetheless, this also may be discerned from the present volume, provided the reader be not obstinate and possess some measure of experience. This artifice constitutes a vital link in the history of alchemy, which was transmitted in the course of time from Asia to Europe during the epoch of the First Crusades, when a general intellectual communion among diverse nations was facilitated by their unification under a common cause. Sciences, arts, and civilization, which had hitherto flourished solely in the East, were gradually transplanted into Europe. Towards the close of the 12th century, or thereabouts, our phoenix likewise bestirred herself and took flight into the West. Roger Bacon was among the first to replenish his lamp from her revivifying spirit, and by experimentally ascending and descending therewith, he is reputed to have discovered the secret ligature of natures and their magical dissolution. Furthermore, he was versed in theology in its most profound principles, as well as in medicine, physics, and metaphysics upon their most intimate foundations, and, having demonstrated the miraculous multiplicability of light through the universal spirit of nature, he applied this knowledge with such efficacy that he produced gold within the mineral kingdom. What wonder is it, persecuted as he was for the natural discoveries he bestowed upon the world without patent or personal profit, that he should appropriate to himself these ultimate fruits of labor and protracted internal study. Yet it does not appear that he was motivated by selfishness even in this specific reservation. It was conscience, as he asserts, that admonished him to withhold a gift perhaps too rashly and hazardously acquired. His acutely penetrative and experimental intellect, unsated even by sufficiency, was led by a fatal curiosity, as has been suggested, into the forbidden realms of self-reliance and illicit peace of mind, ultimately compelling him to abandon these investigations entirely so that he might retrieve his soul and expiate his transgressions in solitude. We are aware that the imputation of magic has often been deemed absurd, and every report of this nature has been attributed merely to the friar's extraordinary proficiency in the natural sciences. The prescription of his writings at Oxford has frequently been cited as an instance of the profound bigotry of that era, as indeed it was. Yet are we not perhaps almost as distant from the truth in our modern tolerance as were our ancestors in their superstition? An accusation of magic has not occurred in recent times, nor would it be likely to trouble seriously any philosopher of the contemporary age. Yet such charges were frequent during the Dark Ages, and who can say whether they may not recur at some future period, when mankind is even more enlightened and intimately acquainted with nature than at present. There still remain 2 or 3 treatises by Roger Bacon wherein the foundations of the Hermetic science are clearly expounded, while the practice is most diligently concealed, in accordance with the maxim he penned in his later years, that truth ought not to be revealed to the vulgar, lest that which is most precious in the hands of a philosopher should become utterly debased. Many illustrious minds illuminated the obscurity of those Middle Ages, magi who were drawn, as it were, to the fire of nature and into communion with her central source. Albertus Magnus, his friend and disciple the acute Aquinas, Scotus Erigena, the subtle doctor, Arnold de Villanova, and Raymond Lully, all of whom were acknowledged adepts. John Reuchlin, Ficinus the Platonist, and Picus de Mirandola, who fused alchemy and therapeutics with Neoplatonism and the Kabbalistic art. Spinoza, likewise, was a profound metaphysician and investigator upon this same experimental ground. Alain de Lisle, the celebrated French philosopher, Merlin, the abbot John Trithemius, Cornelius Agrippa, his enterprising pupil, and many successors to these, all great, resolute, and philosophic intellects, who were not content merely to rend the veil of ignorance from before their own minds, but held it partially open for others, disclosing the inner illuminations of science to those capable of aspiration and willing to follow their illustrious example, laboring along the path. Mediocre mind. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.